Welcome to this episode of Keeping It Green. I'm your host, Erin Lefebvre, and today we're at the North Riverfront Park Youth Garden cleaning up for the winter. One of the factors you want to keep in mind when picking up the garden for the next season is that there may have been diseases and pests that lived in your garden for the summer, and you don't want them to overwinter for next year. So that's why it's a good idea to do some cleanup. And right here we're at the tomato bed. And we did have some blight on the tomatoes this year, so we want to make sure to get as much of the debris out as possible so that next year we won't have that disease readily available in this plot. We also have some weeds in here that are not something we want to overwinter. For instance, this weed here, it's already set some seeds, and if we don't get it out now, the next spring they'll sprout and we'll have more weeds than necessary. So two things, weeds and diseases and pests you want to keep out of the garden for the next season, and that's why we're doing some cleanup today. After we do the cleanup, we're going to put some leaves down. These are mulched up leaves. We're going to put that on top of the soil, and that will also help deter weeds from growing in the spring. And it'll also add some organic matter to the soil. Organic matter helps to hold moisture and nutrients, and some of the nutrients in these leaves will also be available to the next year's plants. The tree leaves that we're putting down on our garden to add nutrients and organic matter and to suppress the weeds for the spring, if they were diseased on the tree, that's not really a concern of ours for the vegetable or flower garden because those diseases don't transfer to vegetables or flowers. So there is no concern of transferring diseases from that mulch that we're putting down. At this garden bed we have a type of broccoli called Romanesco broccoli. It didn't form any heads yet this year, and we're at the end of October. So this is a broccoli that needs a little bit longer growing season, and we're going to take it all out except this plant over here because it's actually starting to form a head, and I'm just curious to see how long it can go into this fall season to see if it will produce. The other experiment I'm going to do is keeping some of these little onions in here just to see how far they'll get and if maybe they'll even be ready in the spring. So that's one consideration when you're putting everything down for the winter in your garden is if there's a few things that are still going, you might just want to see how far they'll go. Another good thing to consider when cleaning up the garden in the fall and getting ready for spring is really good cleanup. Meticulous cleanup is very helpful. So all the potatoes that may still be under there, you may want to dig a little deeper to see if you've got them all out. And all of the disease debris that you may have in there from the leaves as well. It's good to take the time in the fall to clean up every piece that you possibly can so that you have a very good base in the next spring when you can plant again. The North Riverfront Park Youth Garden is utilized by the UW Extension Office. We do weekly programs here in the summer from July to August. We have the kids from the Boys and Girls Club as well as any other people in the public who would like to come can join us. And we do some gardening education in here. We pick the produce and then we use it under the pavilion here in the park with the Wisconsin nutrition educators, and they teach the kids how to make healthy snacks and small meals right at the pavilion.
We're going to talk today a little bit about taking care of different types of houseplants. So I have several different things here that we can look at and figure out how to take care of. This is a hibiscus that bloomed for me beautifully last summer, and I've brought it indoors because I want to keep it. It is a tropical hibiscus, so it would have died had I left it outside. It's not looking its best right now. It doesn't have buds and it's losing some leaves, but this is a very typical thing for a hibiscus to do when it comes inside. The lighting is different, the humidity level is different, so all those things will affect this plant. So if it's losing a few leaves, that's no big deal. The thing you want to look for is, this is a plant that would commonly get spider mites or some other problems, so we're going to take care of that. We're going to kind of be proactive and make sure that it doesn't have those issues. So I have some systemic insecticide, and you'll notice I put gloves on to handle it because it is kind of nasty. For this size pot, I need to put 2.5 tablespoons in here. So I've done this a time or two, so I'm going to eyeball it. And this chemical is a pretty toxic chemical. You don't want it certainly anywhere where pets or children would be able to get at it. And I'm going to put my 2.5 tablespoons into the soil. And I'm wearing gloves because I'm going to work it in with my fingers a little bit. You don't want it right on the top layer, especially if you have a cat or a small child that might stick their hands in it. So I'm working it all the way around the plant, not just in one spot. You want to get it all the way around the whole perimeter of the pot. And then I'm going to work it down into about the top inch or two of the soil. And then you're going to water this well. Okay, once it's watered in, it'll be in the soil in the root zone. It's taken up systemically into the plant, so it's going to be in all the tissues of the plant. So should any scale insects or aphids, whiteflies, spider mites start to attack this plant, they're going to take one little bite and they'll be goners. So that's the easiest way to take care of them. If you find a plant that already has an infestation of bugs, the easiest way to deal with that is to simply place it in a plastic bag, use an insect spray that is meant to be used indoors, and then tie the bag closed and leave it overnight. That should kill anything that's in there. If you also treat the soil with the systemic insecticide, you should be good for bugs for 6 to 8 weeks, possibly longer. Just keep watch on things. Outdoor plants that you have brought indoors will perform much differently indoors. The lighting, even if it's inside the same window where it was outside, very different lighting in the winter here in Wisconsin. So don't have unrealistic expectations that it's going to bloom just the way it did when it was outdoors for you. And then in the spring you'll bring it out and it will be perfect and it'll be bigger than it was last year. The other thing I want to touch on here when we're talking about it is fertilizers. So I have two types of fertilizer here. I have an organic and I have a chemical. Either of them can be used on outdoor plants. One is a blooming fertilizer, the other one is a vegetable fertilizer. But you know what? You don't have to go and purchase a fertilizer that specifically says for houseplants, because fertilizer is fertilizer. Anything that you already have, rather than letting it go to waste or sit on a shelf over the winter, you can certainly use that in your houseplants. What you want to do is adjust the strength, maybe only use it half strength. And it'll work just fine. That way you don't have to go buy extra products and have a whole bunch of open fertilizer things with it. I like to use organic on things that are inside just because I prefer not to have the chemicals, but it's totally a personal choice and either one will work well. Often plants like this hibiscus, I'm going to give it a little bit of a rest. So from November until February, I'm not going to fertilize it. And then starting around Valentine's Day, I'm going to start giving it some more fertilizer. The days are starting to get longer. The light will be better then, and then the plants should start to flourish and be looking really great by the time it's time to go back outside. In this little pot, I have an African violet. The reason it's sitting in this little coffee cup is that this guy likes to be watered from the bottom. You can see there's a spot that I got a little bit of water on this leaf and it's turned brown. That's from having water dripped on it. It doesn't like that. So you can water from the bottom and add your fertilizer into the water at the appropriate time and you're all good to go with those. This is an amaryllis. I want it to bloom at Christmas time, so I planted it in October. So if you haven't planted one in October and you want yours to bloom in Christmas time, the good news is these are widely available in the stores and you can get one that's getting ready to go. But you'll maybe look and think, wow, this isn't really planted very deeply, but an amaryllis only wants to be planted up to what they call its shoulders. So this is already starting to form a little bit of a leaf shoot here, and in a bright sunny window with some fertilizer, I should have a beautiful red bloom by Christmas time. I'm looking forward to it. In the front pot, I have hyacinths. These are bulbs that I am forcing for winter bloom later, maybe February. These I also planted in October because what this needs to do is develop a root system, and then they need to keep chilled for about 12 to 13 weeks, and then after that they'll bloom. You can buy bulbs pre-forced in the store or bulbs that are ready for forcing in the store. But if you don't have access to those, don't worry. There's a solution for you to have winter blooms. Narcissus or paper whites will bloom easily indoors in about 6 weeks. You can just buy the bulbs, plant them up yourself, and in 6 to 7 weeks you're going to have blooms. Very easy. After they bloom, dispose of the bulb because that's not one that would work outside and it has used up so much energy to bloom in winter that it's not going to bloom for you anyway. So that it's just a fun, let's have some flowers in the house in February and then throw them away.
Welcome back to Keeping It Green. We're here with John Stuve from Tree Savvy. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Erin.
He's going to give us some tips about tree pruning and general tree care. So we'll start with this tree. What kind of tree is it?
We have a honey locust here. Typically a wide-growing tree, not a tall-growing tree. But with your wide-growing trees, they tend to hang very low. So typically, as the tree matures, you'd like to get the branches that are going to hit you in the head or knock you off your lawnmower pruned off, just to make your life easier.
So where on here would you prune? Do we cut up here, real close to the trunk?
Well, we could start here and take the weight off the branch. That way when we make our finish cut, just outside the branch collar, or where the branch starts to swell, we cut just outside of that. That we don't want to tear down the trunk, because that will damage the tree and could lead to decay and rot.
Okay, so we just want a nice little angle cut, and this is the branch collar right about in here.
Yeah, sometimes it's real clear where the swelling is. If it's not clear, roughly 45-degree angle will work too.
And what's going on down here? I see some spot.
We are in a park, and so we have some damage. Could be a lawnmower, could be kids goofing around. If you have loose bark, sometimes you can take a sharp knife and just trace that loose bark out of there. Otherwise, that'll tend to hold moisture and can also lead to decay in the trunk of the tree.
Anything should we paint over it?
No, by painting those wounds, you can trap the moisture, and again, that would potentially lead to decay. One way to keep the mowers away is to put mulch around the base of the tree. The rule of thumb is the more the better as far as going out from the tree, but you don't want to pile the mulch high up the trunk. You want it 2 to 4 inches outside and then taper down to nothing at the base of the tree.
So a donut shape, not a volcano.
Correct.
Good.
No mulch volcanoes.
No mulch volcanoes. All right. The other thing I see on here is was this lichens?
Yes, that's typical. On most trees you will find them. That's not a disease problem. That's no problem with the tree. They just have a symbiotic relationship with the tree.
So now we're here at this Chinese elm.
Correct.
And we're looking at a common problem we see around in other trees. Can you tell us about this?
Well, this is special to the elm family. It's called a slime flux. It's not a disease. It's not an insect issue. It's the tree's defense to keep disease and insects out of this weak spot, or this crack, or the split between the two trunks. Nothing really wants to go through this because it's so gross, but there is no problem with the tree just because of this oozing out. It's actually the tree defense. The tree does have there is a crack here, and its strength is at question. Were there a house underneath it and the tree deemed valuable, there may be a candidate to put a cable in just to strengthen it, to keep one or the other half of that tree from failing.
So this coloring here, is this just from staining from this?
Yes, that's pretty crystal clear, and you see it on a lot of elms, that white stain on the bark, slime flux. Very lovely.
The tree is just telling us that there's kind of a weak point in there, and there's really nothing we can do for it at this point.
Correct.
Winters are so long in Wisconsin, and it's nothing sadder than seeing your empty flower pot sitting on your porch with nothing in it during those cold winter months. So there's a great solution to that. It's inexpensive, it's easy to do, and it's actually a lot of fun. So I'm going to make a porch pot with this pot. This is my flower pot from summer, and I've kept the soil in it because I'm going to use that. You can use sand. The only problem with sand is it tends to dry out a little bit in the winter. So if you have your soil and you haven't thrown it away, that's perfect. If you have your soil and it's frozen, bring your pot in the house for a while until it thaws out, and then you're good to go. So the first things I'm going to do, I've gone out into my yard and harvested some different greenery. So here I have cedar, and That's pretty readily available, and the great thing this year, we had a nice wet summer, so all the greens are nice and fresh and lively. They're not dry and getting lost needles and stuff. This is white pine. White pine is beautiful and soft. It adds really a lot to the pot. I love white pine. I can't say enough good stuff about white pine. And this is red pine. Now red pine is coarser. It's longer needled pine, but the nice thing about it is often it has pine cones on it, so that's a plus as far as I'm concerned. Depending on the size of your pot, if it's a little arrangement like the one over there on the right, you're not going to want to put white pine in that. It's just too small of a pot to accommodate a larger branch like that. Okay, here I have some greens that I purchased at a local box store. These are spruce tops, and they run anywhere from maybe $2 to $4 a piece, depending on the height and what they are. This is an actual cash crop in Wisconsin and Minnesota. They are harvested from swamps. It is regulated by the DNR. Please do not cut the tops off your pine trees and spruce trees in your yard, or they're going to be ugly for a long time. But these are renewable. They are, cultivated, so you're not, killing the environment with these. So I'm going to take my tall one here, and this pot is just going to face out. I'm going to put it up against the wall by my house, so I want it to be more front facing. You could also do one that was more all around, but today we're going to go front facing. So I'm going to take my tall top and stick it back here. Then I've got a couple more, and I want to offset the tall top over here with this other one that's a little bit fuller, but it's not quite as tall. So, and then you can kind of open these branches up a little bit. Now this third one is kind of funky. It's more fat than tall and skinny, but I'm going to put that in at an angle to give me a nice full looking pot to start out with. But we want to have some things draping down the front too. We want it to be nice and full looking. So I'm going to take my cedar next, and I'm going to put it over here. Angle it in however you need to. If you need to clip it with your clippers, that's fine too. Okay, then I want a nice full frond matching on the other side and a little bit down here in the front. Now, there's so many other things you can be adding to these pots too, depending on what you have in your yard. As far as your evergreen shrubs, be a little bit careful trimming those because it's not really the best time to trim them. This is more woodland greenery that I'm putting in here, things that I actually found in the woods near my home. Okay, so now I'm going to add my white pine, and that's going to add that nice softness to it. Somebody asked me the other day, how do you make an arrangement that looks pretty with snow on it? These do look pretty with snow on them. And if you don't like them with snow on them, you get your leaf blower out and you blow it right off so you don't have to worry. So I'm not worrying too much about the back because, as I said, this one I'm not going to really be seeing from the back because it's going to be against the wall. And this I want to make sure is in a good spot because I want to see those pretty pine cones. That's one of the nice features that you have with the red pine. And I'm going to accent the other side. So you can see this is going together pretty quickly. It doesn't take that much. I also found some nice birch twigs. I had a birch that was kind of rubbing against the house and I don't want it there during the winter. So I took my birch twigs and I actually sprayed them with a coppery spray paint that matches my pot. So I'm going to put those back up in here for a little height. If you don't want them to be brown or copper colored, you could spray them red. You could use red twig dogwood. You could spray them white. That's kind of one of the new trends is woodsy with white, and that would be very fun to have as well. So your limit is your imagination. These are pine cones I picked up in the woods on a walk, and again, I've sprayed these with the copper spray paint and let them dry, and then I sprayed them with Elmer's glue spray, which is really easy, comes in a can. You can get it at Shopko or any place. It's easy to come by. And then I threw some glitter on here, so I got a little bit of glitz going on. Not a lot, but just a little, because I do want this to be mostly pretty woodsy. The nice thing about keeping it woodsy too is if it's not too holiday colored, then you're not thinking, oh, this is like very, very Christmassy. So this is woodsy. So, and I happened to save an abandoned bird nest this summer. So I'm going to add my little bird nest up in here. And there we go. Now, if you wanted to add more things to it, you can add some plastic Christmas balls. Those are so inexpensive and they come in a million different colors, so you can coordinate with whatever you want for your house. If you get some little plastic bird eggs and put it in here if you wanted to keep it woodsy. You can add a ribbon, you can add sparkle. There's just no end to what you can do with these. Once your creation is the way you want it, stand back and take a look at it, make sure you're happy with it, and then water it and let it freeze. Once these greens have frozen into place, they're going to be beautiful for you until March, April, maybe even May, depending on the winter we have. So you've created something now that you have something gorgeous in front of your house for the winter months, and your pots aren't sitting sad and empty anymore. We have a viewer question. Dave from Altoona wants to know, when is the best time to prune shrubs? And that's a great question. Unfortunately, there's no one specific answer. Shrubs that flower in spring, such as lilacs or azaleas, should be pruned within 6 to 8 weeks after flowering. If you prune them beyond that, you're very likely to lose your flowers for next year. Another one that would be a good example of is forsythia. So those, you have a small window right after they've bloomed to prune them into a shape. Pruning them beyond that, if you prune them in the fall, you're going to lose your flowers for next year. If it's an absolute necessity because you just need to control the size of it, just be aware that you're going to lose the flowers. The other thing, sometimes people, especially with a lilac, will want to do what's called a rejuvenation pruning, and that would involve taking out all but 7 to 11 of the nice newer shoots, maybe taking out a lot of the old canes. If you're doing that type of pruning, you probably are going to lose your flowers for at least a year because you're trying to rejuvenate the plant and get it to look beautiful again. Maybe it's just gotten old and really gnarly and all the flowers are 12 feet at the top of it. So that would be one answer. Other shrubs, red twig dogwood, stuff like that, some of those things can be pruned anytime. Spirea, I like to shape my spirea in the spring, let them leaf out and flower, and then usually after, to remove the spent flowers because they're not very pretty, I just do another quick shape along about mid-June. Try not to prune your shrubs in the summer when it's really, really hot or very, very dry. That's not healthy for the plant, but spireas, potentillas, some of your other common plants, barberries, those can pretty much be shaped at any time. If you're doing some serious pruning down to the ground, then certainly you want to do that in early spring whenever possible. Evergreens are a whole nother story as well. Evergreens should be pruned either in June or September, and that's not from any scientific thing, that's from my dad. So he always seemed to know. June and September, that's when we prune the evergreens. And that works out well. In June, they've flushed out their spring growth and may need to be shaped because they may be starting to get a little scraggly or a little overgrown looking. And in September, if you want to shape them again before winter, that's another great time to do it because it gives the plant time to harden off before winter really comes. You don't want to be doing it, in the depth of winter for those type of plants. Another good time to prune is late winter, early spring, February, March, depending on, if you can get to some of your things. The great thing then is you can see the structure of the plant. So if you're going to try and take an old overgrown hedge, you don't have to fight through the leaves. You can get in there and see, okay, these are old, dying branches. Take those out and remove them. Let the new branches take over for next spring and you'll have a much prettier shrub.
So here at this Kentucky coffee tree, it's got a couple problems. So we'll start with the most glaring problem here.
Yes, something took a third of the bark off. Again, don't know, but it is putting on nice callus trying to close that wound. But there is some loose bark that could be peeled back a little bit in order to prevent the moisture from building up in there. Keep it dry.
And that's about all you can do.
That's all you can do. You don't want to paint it. You just let Mother Nature heal over and hope for the best. Now this is something Mother Nature won't on her own heal over, is something called an included bark. This extremely tight branch formation, the wood on either stem never grows together. It actually pushes against either side. So in a heavy wind or snowfall and you see half a tree laying and the rest standing and it's real black in between the two, everybody thinks that's a lightning strike. That's not. That's called included bark. That's the bark being crushed. So in a young tree like this could be eliminated, and then you wouldn't have the situation we had with the elm where you have two huge trunks with that real tight V that would need cabling later on. So the earlier you can catch the problems in your young trees, the better old trees you will have.
So this is almost going to have two large limbs if one of them isn't cut off.
Right.
It's almost like maybe like a 2-liter.
Yeah, like a 2-liter, and you don't need to take it all off at once. You can head part of the tree back to slow the growth of this side and allow this one to take over. Then later on, this either becomes just another branch or it can be eliminated completely depending on how the form will look.
So it would be a lot to take off, but it's good in the long run.
Yes. I think you're better off in a couple of stages so you're not making such a huge wound. So do it in 2 parts over a couple of years.
Thanks for joining us at the Youth Garden today. We covered some winterizing techniques for the garden and talked about tree care. Join us next time on Keeping It Green.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cbctv.org.